I walked in on my girlfriend of 9 years messing around with my best buddy right at his fancy beach resort wedding. And then I found out every single one of our pals knew about it and had been chuckling behind my back the whole time. So, I played it cool like I was clueless and dropped the hammer during his wedding ceremony, wrecking not just his big day, but the perfect little life he'd built up. Back when I was in grad school, I rolled with a tight crew in the genetic engineering department, a group that really had each other's backs. Since we all graduated, we've stayed pretty connected over the years, catching up whenever we could. There were 8 of us in that squad, 5 gals and 3 guys, a solid mix. One of the fellas, who I'll call Mett, was my lab partner, and man, we hit it off like brothers from day one. He's been my ride or die since those research days, so when he invited me to his big destination wedding, I was there, no question. That's where everything just blew up in my face. From that same crew, I'd been with one of the ladies for the last almost decade. Let's call her Amanda. Here's the backstory. Amanda was tight with these folks first, but once we started going out, I kinda slid into the group naturally, and so did Mett. We kicked things off in our second year of grad school. I was 25 at the time, figuring out life. Over the past 9 years, we've grown up together, pushed through some rough patches, and always managed to patch things up. For the last 2 years, I'd been bringing up marriage with Amanda, but she kept saying she wasn't ready, which threw me off. I mean, we were both killing it career-wise. She was a rockstar molecular research director, and I'd turned my dad's shaky pharma company into a booming biotech outfit over the last 2 years. We'd even been shacked up in a swanky penthouse for 4 years, so I couldn't wrap my head around why tying the knot felt like such a hurdle for her. I'm big on career wins, sure, but I also wanted to start a family, and lately, that's been sparking some heated arguments between us. She'd tell me I was pushing too hard, which made zero sense after 9 years together. Then she'd go on about how I should focus on taking the company global, like I wasn't already outpacing everyone we knew, which was ridiculous. I'd point out how tons of big-shot execs juggle thriving careers and family life, and I was more than ready to do the same. It started hitting me that she was dodging marriage because she just didn't want to lock things down with me, and that stung deep after a decade. Even with all the fighting these past few months, we never called it quits. Her attitude had me stumped, but I never once thought she might be stepping out on me. She acted totally normal otherwise. One of us would say sorry after a spat, and I figured we'd always find our way back to solid ground. That hope got smashed to bits at Mett's wedding when I realized she'd probably been cheating for who knows how long. And with Mett, the groom, of all people, I caught them red-handed just days before the ceremony, locked in a cozy moment in the resort's private beach cabana, of all places. Instead of storming in and making a scene, I went for a bigger play, decided I'd shame him in front of everyone. So, Amanda and I had flown out to this Bali resort for Mett's wedding, landing the day before the big event. We were supposed to hit the rehearsal dinner that night, but I was wiped from the flight and battling one of my usual migraines, so I bailed. Later, that migraine cranked up, and since I'd forgotten my meds at home, I wandered down to the beach to clear my head. That's when I spotted them in the cabana, caught him through the curtains, lit up by the moonlight, totally wrapped up in each other. They didn't even notice me standing there for a couple of minutes, just watching, my brain reeling. Once the shock wore off, I slipped away quiet, my thoughts all over the place. I figured I'd lean on Naomi, another pal from our group, to help me sort through this mess and muster up the guts to face them. But when I got to her oceanfront villa, I heard a bunch of voices. Turns out, the whole gang was there, chatting away. They weren't just talking, though. They were cracking up about Mett and Amanda, joking about how I had no clue what they'd all known for ages. Ethan, one of the other researchers, tossed out a line about how those two were bound to slip up eventually, especially since they'd gotten sloppy, apparently even sneaking around in my own lab once when I'd headed home early during Mett's engagement party. Man, the whole crew thought it was a riot, and I was floored by how they chatted about my heartbreak like it didn't even matter to them. I quietly slipped away from the door, too stunned to make a sound. Lucky for me, they were all too buzzed on those pricey resort cocktails to spot me lurking nearby. That night hit me like a freight train, hands down the worst I've ever had, but after about 10 minutes of losing it in the private ocean view terrace, I pulled myself together and started cooking up a plan. When Amanda finally strolled back to our suite, I played it off like everything was fine, and we crashed for the night without a word about it. Come morning, the wedding day, I put on my usual friendly face and said hi to everyone like nothing was up. The day rolled along just fine until I stood up right before the beachfront ceremony was about to kick off. In front of all the guests, I said I wanted to give a little speech to celebrate my buddy Mett. It wasn't the usual thing to do, and I caught a few confused looks, but Mett, probably expecting some mushy toast, gave me the green light. Of course, the second they figured out where I was going with it, they scrambled to shut me down. Amanda had it easy since she was parked right next to me. She kept tugging at my arm, trying to yank me back into my seat and hush me up, like that'd fix anything now. Mett totally flipped out, yelling about how I was just jealous of his big moment, claiming I was wrecking his wedding because my girl wouldn't put a ring on it, acting like I was out to steal his shine, but he overdid it, getting way too defensive, which only made his fiancée, Olivia, start buying into what I was saying. When it clicked for her, she got up real quiet from her fancy beach chair and just walked off, leaving the ceremony behind. The minute Mett clocked that he'd been ditched at the altar, he took off running after her across the sand, and the whole scene turned into a total mess. By then, I couldn't have cared less about any of it. I shook Amanda's frantic grip off my arm, headed to the resort parking lot where I'd stashed my packed bags earlier, and peeled out to the airport for the next flight home. 3 days went by with no word from anyone, but then yesterday, Amanda hit me up with MES Naomi saying yeah, she and Mett messed up, but what I pulled was straight up nuts, said I didn't just tank the wedding, I blew up his whole life. Word is, his folks have totally cut him off, and Olivia's already called off the engagement. Now he's basically got no place to crash, since he was banking on this marriage to bail him out of his money troubles. Here's the real scoop. Mett's nothing but a scheming gold digger, and that whole wedding was a giant con from the get-go. He didn't meet Olivia through some mutual buddies 5 months back like they told everyone. Nah, they hooked up on this exclusive matchmaking agency for rich folks looking to pair off. Olivia's 8 years older than him, and her billionaire family laid down the law, settle down in a proper marriage or kiss her huge trust fund goodbye to her more squared-away little brother. That pressure had her scrambling for a match, but truth is, she couldn't care less about a cookie-cutter marriage. She was hunting for somebody cool with an open setup, but hadn't found the right fit until Mett popped up on that app. He saw an angle quick and hatched a plan that'd work out for both of them. Mett didn't give a rip about tying the knot either. He'd been jobless for almost 2.5 years, bouncing between random gigs but never sticking with anything long. All he really wanted was to hitch his wagon to some money and lock in his future. Turns out, Olivia's family runs one of the biggest luxury pharma cosmetics empire in Southeast Asia, which made it even sweeter for him. You can probably guess how this all lined up. After a few sit-downs, they figured they could fix each other's problems like a perfect puzzle. Everything was falling into place for them, until I dropped the truth bomb at the wedding and threw a wrench in it. Since their families had no clue about their little deal, Olivia had to bounce when it all came out. Her old-school folks would never go for her marrying a guy like Mett, especially after his buddy aired their dirty laundry in front of a couple hundred big-deal guests. Even though their setup was a win-win for them, it's toast now, and they had to ditch the whole thing fast. He'd been crashing at Olivia's penthouse for months and even quit his last gig as a medical equipment consultant. After this wedding disaster, even his own parents won't let him come home. He's got nowhere to turn, and good luck landing a job with a resume that's just a graveyard of half-baked stints. Even if Mett lands a job somewhere, it'll probably be some basic gig that's nowhere near the cushy life he's used to. Now, Amanda's pointing fingers at me, saying I'm a cold-hearted jerk for tanking his world, claiming I should have pulled them aside quietly instead of airing it all out and leaving him in such a mess. Even our old research crew has washed their hands of both of them, and he's scrambling with money troubles big time. For some weird reason, she thinks I ought to feel bad about all this. Truth is, I don't have a shred of pity for Mett, and I'm not buying that his life's totally trashed. All he's got to do is buckle down, snag a real job, and stick with it instead of always chasing get-rich-quick schemes off other folks' cash. If you ask me, I might have done him a solid by shoving some harsh truth his way, though knowing him, he'll probably just try to hustle somebody else next. What does nag at me a little is how I dragged both families through the mud in front of everyone. I'm pretty sure my speech cast a dark cloud over two well-respected names, and I've known Mett's folks forever. They're solid people, honestly. That's the one piece of Amanda's MES Naomi that actually sticks with me, and I'll admit I feel a twinge of regret about it. I get that I could have played it smarter, sat them down privately, cut ties with Amanda, and walked away like a grown-up instead of stirring up this giant mess that's left me second-guessing myself. 2 days later, here's the first update. I still haven't answered Amanda's text about Mett's whole deal. I'm not about to let guilt trip me up. If I snapped, and it made some folks look bad, that's not my burden to carry. Yeah, it probably stung his parents, but I can't muster up too much sorrow over it. They're good people, no doubt. But Mett? He's a different story. He had that coming, and I'm not sorry one bit. I'm not planning to say my bad to anybody, not even his mom and dad. I finally shot Amanda a reply, but just to tell her she's got to swing by the penthouse ASAP to grab her stuff. We're done, and I can't stomach her living here, or even seeing her junk lying around anymore. I've already boxed it all up nice and neat, set it aside so she can swoop in, load up, and get out without dragging it out. She's the only one I haven't blocked yet, but that's just 'cause we need to sort this move-out thing. Once that's squared away, she's getting the block button too. Everyone else from our research posse is already ghosted, with Mett being the first I axed from my life. Now that a little time's passed since that blowout, all the feelings are crashing in hard. It wasn't just a couple of people who stabbed me in the back. It was my girlfriend, my best buddy, and a whole crew I thought of as family, 'cause we were that tight. Of course, I've been a wreck over it, but thank goodness my real family's been there to hold me up. They've been popping by every day, making sure I'm eating, staying sane, and not slipping into some dark hole. I can't tell you how much I appreciate having them in my corner. 9 days later, Second update, Amanda texted this morning saying she'd stop by tonight to pick up her things. I said cool, figuring since she'd been radio silent for over a week, she'd just grab her boxes and bounce. But nope, when she showed up and I handed over the stuff, she insisted on poking around the penthouse to check if I missed anything. I wasn't thrilled about letting her in, knowing it'd turn into a whole ordeal, but I figured I might have skipped something by accident, and I wanted this done in one shot, so I let her through the door. She wandered room to room, snagging a few odds and ends I'd overlooked, but then she didn't head out, she just hung around in the living room, making it awkward as heck. When I finally asked if she was going to hit the road, she admitted she wanted to chat, hoping I'd cooled off enough to talk about our issues, which ticked me off big time. She acted like it had been years since everything went down, when it hadn't even been 2 weeks yet. Plus, I didn't see a single thing worth hashing out with her. She cheated with my best friend, who was days away from his own wedding, for crying out loud. The real issue was them, not me. I made that crystal clear when I told her she was only there to pick up her stuff. I'd already said my piece, and now that she had her boxes, there was no point in dragging it out with more talk. But she wouldn't let it go. She started pushing back, saying sure, she cheated. But I wasn't some saint either, and I needed to quit acting like this was all on her. Up until that moment, I'd kept my cool, short and sharp with her, even though I was getting more annoyed by the second. But when she hinted that I was partly to blame for her stepping out, I lost it and started yelling my head off. I couldn't wrap my mind around her nerve, suggesting I'd somehow pushed her into cheating, like I'd handed her a shove right into Mett's arms. I'm not claiming I'm flawless, nobody is, but the way she said it made it sound like I'd cornered her into that choice. I could see exactly where she was headed with this, and I wasn't wrong. She brought up how we'd been clashing lately cause I was ready to settle down, tie the knot, and start a family. While she kept saying she wasn't there yet, she spun it like she was the one suffering, stuck under this big decision she couldn't handle. She went off about how I'd boxed her into our relationship, saying that in 9 years with me, she'd never had a chance to figure out life on her own. We'd always factored each other into every plan, every move, and apparently that meant she didn't even know herself anymore, and somehow, I was the bad guy for that. I was floored she thought any of this held water as an excuse. If 9 years together left her with such huge hang-ups about committing to me, then we were obviously after totally different things. She could have just talked to me straight or walked away clean. Instead, she picked cheating, testing the waters with somebody else while keeping me around as her fallback plan. And I was the jerk for not being okay with that? Her playing the victim and trying to put our faults on the same level had me so fired up I yelled, till my voice gave out. But she kept at it, doubling down, saying I'd put her under crazy pressure and Mett got her in ways I never could. I told her over and over to get out, but she wouldn't budge, demanding I own up to my flaws and admit I'd been just as bad as her. I should have buzzed security to haul her out, but I was so worked up it didn't even cross my mind. In the end, I was so fed up with her excuses that I just marched over, swung the door wide open, and stood there quiet as a stone while she kept yapping in her defense. It took a solid few minutes of me standing there, saying nothing, for her to finally catch on, and man, it took everything I had not to fire back at her nonsense. I just stayed mute, holding the door, waiting her out. She finally stormed out, but not before tossing one last dig my way, said I could act all high and mighty if I wanted, but we both knew it took two to tank what we had. I totally agreed. It took her and Mett to wreck it, but I didn't waste my breath telling her that. Saying anything would have just kicked off another pointless shouting match, and I didn't have the patience or juice left for that. Once she was gone, I slammed the door shut and took a minute to steady my pounding chest. Even back when we were together, she could never own up to being wrong. I used to think it was kinda cute, in a quirky way. But today? It drove me up the wall, and I'm glad she took off when she did. I was this close to chucking something at her head. Fast forward 2 years, here's the final update. It's been a couple years since I last checked in, and I'm finally spilling how it all shook out. I've been mulling over posting an update for months, and today I logged in to lay it all out there. Work-wise, things are firing on all cylinders, better than ever, honestly. I've gotten hooked on fitness lately, hitting the gym hard, and it's done wonders for keeping my head straight. For 2 solid years, I've had zero contact with that old research crew, and I couldn't care less what they're up to these days. My family's been my lifeline through the whole healing process, checking in constantly to make sure I'm good, and that's more than enough for me. I've trimmed my friend circle down to a handful, just a couple high school buddies and some work pals, but they're real, solid folks who actually give a darn about me. Lately, I've dipped my toes back into dating. For a whole year after the mess, I swore off relationships, still sorting through the baggage from that last one. Then, at this International Genetics Symposium, a coworker introduced me to her research assistant, Sophie. She's sharp as a tack, super kind-hearted, and I felt this spark with her right off the bat, nothing like I'd ever known before. My colleague set up a laid-back dinner for us, and we've been going out ever since. I laid it all out for Sophie about my past, 9 years with my ex, the fallout, and why I'm taking it slow before jumping in deep. She's been amazing about it, totally cool with my pace and respecting where I'm at. She even said she's happy to wait, cause she thinks we're a perfect fit, brain and heart-wise. Best of all, we're on the same page about marriage and kids. She wants what I want, and it feels like I've finally met someone who gets me. Funny twist, Amanda and Mett tied the knot 2.5 months after my last update, but it fell apart in 7 months. I got the scoop from an old grad school buddy who keeps up with everyone's drama. I'm not gonna fake any tears for them. That'd be a straight-up fib, but I hope they take it as a wake-up call about torching people's trust like they did mine. Knowing them, though, they'll probably just keep running the same playbook. Our old research gang split up every which way. Some jetted off overseas for jobs, others ditched the field altogether, and a few tried reaching out to me, but I kept my distance. That whole scandal pretty much shredded the group's friendships, though I hear a couple still sneak around staying in touch. The biotech world's small enough that I catch wind of Mett floundering, still trying to sweet-talk his way into big roles instead of earning them fair and square. Amanda, from what I heard, packed up and started over at some research lab in another country, where nobody knows her backstory yet. Me? I'm honestly over it all. That betrayal doesn't keep me up nights anymore. I've rebuilt my life in ways I never saw coming. My company's gone global, I've put out some game-changing research papers, and biggest of all, I've learned to trust again, with friends and now with Sophie. That mess taught me the difference between real connections and fake ones. Tough lesson, but worth it. Sure, getting stabbed in the back like that knocked me flat, but in the end, it cut me loose from people who never really had my back. Now I've got a circle built on real respect and honesty, and I'm genuinely happy. Looking back, I wouldn't tweak a thing about how I handled it. Sometimes airing out a betrayal in front of everybody, messy as it was, is the kickstart you need for a fresh start. It made everyone face the music instead of coasting along in their cozy little lies. Yeah, the way it went down was loud and wild, but the truth had to break free, and I'm cool with how it all played out. The guy I am now, thriving at work, in killer shape, feeling good inside, and dating someone who's on my wavelength, came out of that fire tougher and smarter. Sometimes you've got to lose what you thought mattered to figure out what really does.